In 2004, Joseph Bonanno, the fearsome head of the Bonanno crime family, did the unthinkable. He became the first sitting boss of a New York Mafia family to turn government witness. His testimony didn't just send shockwaves through the underworld, it signed the death warrant for a criminal enterprise that was once reportedly worth hundreds of millions. This is the story of how the Bonanno family lost it all. They were a powerhouse, a founding member of the American Mafia's board of directors, known as the Commission. From the shadows, they steered a financial empire built on fear, with tentacles reaching into every corner of the economy. From the garment district to concrete, and from cheese manufacturing to car dealerships. Their influence was so vast, their wealth so immense, they were once compared to US Steel. But that empire, built over generations, was about to crumble. And it wouldn't be a single gunshot that brought them down. It would be the slow, methodical grind of a new kind of war. A war on their money. This is how aggressive federal prosecutions, groundbreaking laws, and catastrophic betrayals dismantled the Bonanno family's financial machine, turning a titan of the underworld into a shadow of its former self. To understand the sheer scale of the collapse, you first have to grasp what was lost. The Bonanno crime family wasn't just a gang of street thugs. They were a sophisticated, multi-generational corporation of crime. And for decades, their CEO was the man himself, Joseph Bonanno. When Giuseppe Bonanno landed in Brooklyn from Sicily in 1924, he saw a land of infinite, albeit illegal, opportunity. Prohibition was in full swing, and the ambitious young immigrant quickly found his footing in the world of bootlegging. As a protege of Salvatore Maranzano, a powerful boss from his hometown, he learned the business of organized crime from the ground up. And he learned it wasn't just about violence, it was about control, networks, and above all, money. After a bloody mob war in 1931 that saw his mentor killed, a new order was born. Charles Lucky Luciano created the Mafia Commission, a board of directors for New York's 5 families, designed to stop future wars by dividing up the city's lucrative rackets. At just 26 years old, Joseph Bonanno was crowned the head of his own family, the youngest boss in the nation. Under his leadership, the family entered its golden era. Bonanno was a visionary, a traditionalist, who ran his organization with the secrecy of an old-world Sicilian clan. He mostly inducted men from his hometown, creating a tight-knit, loyal structure that was famously hard for law enforcement to crack. For nearly 70 years, the Bonanno family held a proud, unbroken record. Not a single made man had ever become a government informant. This discipline let them focus on what mattered, making money, and they made it in staggering amounts. Their wealth was built on the classic mob rackets. Loan sharking, or shylocking, was a cash cow, preying on the desperate with sky-high interest rates. Illegal gambling, from backroom card games to huge bookmaking rings, generated a steady, untaxable river of cash. And extortion, disguised as protection, was another pillar, forcing legitimate businesses to pay up for the privilege of not being burned down or worse. But Joe Bonanno's vision went way beyond street-level crime. He knew that real, lasting power came from infiltrating legitimate industries. He used illegal profits as seed capital for a vast and diverse portfolio. The family invested heavily in businesses that could launder their dirty money and provide a respectable front. They bought into cheese companies, garment factories, trucking firms, and construction businesses. By the 1960s, their influence was everywhere. They ran rackets at the Fulton Fish Market, controlled unions at Kennedy Airport, and held a major stake in the city's concrete business, allowing them to skim profits from some of New York's biggest construction projects. Joe Bonanno himself lived less like a street boss and more like a corporate titan. He distanced himself from the grid of Brooklyn, moving to a sprawling estate on Long Island and owning a 280-acre farm upstate. He cultivated the image of a respectable businessman, even while orchestrating a criminal enterprise worth a fortune. The family's reach extended far beyond New York, with operations in Arizona, California, and even Canada, where they set up a crucial satellite regime in Montreal. That Canadian connection became one of their most profitable and ultimately most dangerous ventures: the international heroin trade. In partnership with the Sicilian Mafia, The Bonannos helped create what became known as the pizza connection, using pizzerias as fronts to import and distribute billions of dollars worth of heroin into the US. It was an incredibly lucrative business, but it also brought a new level of risk and attention the family had long tried to avoid. While Bonanno publicly claimed to despise the drug trade, his underlings, men like the notoriously vicious Carmine Galante, embraced it with a vengeance, seeing it as the ultimate path to riches. For over 30 years, from the 1930s to the mid-1960s, the Bonanno family was one of the most powerful and wealthiest criminal organizations in the country. They were a founding member of the Commission, a feared and respected force in the underworld. Their financial empire seemed unshakable. Joseph Bonanno had built a dynasty, but in the world of the Mafia, stability is just an illusion. The same greed that built the empire would soon plant the seeds of its destruction. And as the family looked to the future, they couldn't see the storm gathering on the horizon. A storm that would be unleashed not by a rival, but by the full, focused might of the United States government. How did it all go so wrong? Every great empire eventually faces a crisis. For the Bonanno crime family, that turning point wasn't a single event, but a cascade of failures that started in the 1960s and spiraled into a catastrophe. The discipline that defined their golden era gave way to greed, paranoia, and bloody infighting, leaving them wide open for a new and powerful federal weapon. The first major cracks appeared, ironically, because of Joe Bonanno's own soaring ambition. By the early 1960s, he was no longer content being just one of 5 New York bosses. He plotted to assassinate the leaders of the Gambino and Lucchese families to become the boss of all bosses. The plot was a spectacular failure. When the Commission discovered his treachery, they were furious. Bonanno was forced into hiding, and in his absence, the Commission declared he was no longer the boss, appointing a rival, Gaspar Di Gregorio, in his place. This sparked a bitter internal conflict known as the Bonanno War. The family split into 2 warring factions. For years, the Bonannos were consumed by backstabbing and violence. The war shattered their once unbreakable unity. When Joe Bonanno finally re-emerged, he was allowed a quiet retirement in Arizona in 1968, but the damage was done. The family he left behind was a fractured mess, and to punish them for the chaos, the Commission kicked them off the board. A humiliating blow that marked them as outcasts in the underworld. Into this power vacuum stepped one of the most feared figures in Mafia history, Carmine Lilo Galante. Galante was old school, a man with an insatiable appetite for money and power. While the official boss, Philip Rusty Rustelli, ruled from a prison cell, Galante became the street boss in the 1970s and declared himself the true leader. His primary focus was the heroin trade, which he expanded into a massive global operation, bringing in millions upon millions in revenue. But Galante's greed was his fatal flaw. He refused to share the enormous profits from his drug empire with the other families, a direct violation of commission rules. He muscled in on their territories, openly challenging the authority of the other bosses. He surrounded himself with a crew of fanatically loyal Sicilian bodyguards and acted as if he were invincible. This arrogance was a death sentence. In 1979, the other families had enough. With the blessing of the imprisoned Bonanno boss Rustelli, the Commission sanctioned Galante's murder. He was gunned down on the patio of a Brooklyn restaurant, a cigar still clenched in his teeth. A brutal and public end to his reign. Galante's death, however, didn't bring stability. It only deepened the chaos. But the greatest threat was no longer coming from within. While the Bonannos were busy fighting each other, the federal government was preparing an attack that would change everything. In 1970, Congress passed the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO. On the surface, it sounded like complex legal jargon, but its purpose was revolutionary. For decades, prosecutors fought a losing battle, picking off individual mobsters for single crimes, only to see them immediately replaced. It was like cutting the heads off a hydra. RICO changed the game. It allowed the government to prosecute the entire criminal enterprise. Under RICO, prosecutors could link a series of crimes, murder, extortion, loan sharking, together as a pattern of racketeering activity. If they could prove these crimes were done for a criminal organization, they could indict the entire leadership. The penalties were severe: long prison sentences and, most importantly, a provision that would become the Bonanno family's worst nightmare: asset forfeiture. For the first time, the government had the power to seize any and all ill-gotten gains. Homes, cars, businesses, bank accounts, every dollar earned through crime could be taken away. It took law enforcement a while to figure out how to best use this new tool. But by the early 1980s, they were ready. The FBI had just scored a monumental victory. An undercover agent named Joseph Pistone, posing as a jewel thief named Donnie Brasco, had spent 6 years inside the Bonanno family, gathering unprecedented intelligence. When the operation ended in 1981, the fallout was catastrophic. The Brasco infiltration led to over 100 convictions and exposed the family's inner workings to the world. It was a profound humiliation. Their prized reputation for secrecy was shattered forever. The combination of internal chaos, the shame of the Donnie Brasco affair, and the looming threat of RICO left the Bonanno family on the brink of collapse. They had lost their seat at the table, their leadership was in shambles, and their most sacred traditions had been violated. They were about to face a legal onslaught designed not just to imprison their members, but to bankrupt their entire organization. The dismantling of their fortune was about to begin. The 80s and 90s marked the beginning of the end for the Bonanno family's financial empire. The federal government, armed with the RICO Act and intelligence from sources like Donnie Brasco, launched a relentless campaign. This wasn't a war fought with guns in back alleys. It was fought in courtrooms with indictments and forfeiture orders. It was a strategic dismantling of the family's economic base, and it was devastatingly effective. The first major blow came after the Donnie Brasco scandal. Using the intelligence from Pistone, federal prosecutors launched a series of RICO indictments that ripped through the family's ranks, sending dozens of made men to prison. The family was in disgrace. The Mafia Commission, disgusted by the infiltration, kept them blackballed from major underworld decisions. For a time, the Bonannos were so weak that the FBI shifted its focus, believing they were no longer a significant threat. This period on the sidelines allowed for a surprising resurgence under a new, ambitious boss, Joseph "Big Joey" Bonanno. Bonanno took over in 1991 and was determined to restore the family to its former glory. He was a shrewd and paranoid leader who learned from past mistakes. To counter FBI surveillance, he ordered his men never to say his name aloud. Instead, they had to touch their ears when referring to him. He shut down the family's social clubs, which were full of FBI bugs, and moved sensitive meetings to remote locations. Under Bonanno, the family quietly rebuilt. He steered them back to their core moneymakers: labor racketeering, extortion, illegal gambling, and loan sharking. By the late 1990s, the Bonannos were back. They had regained their seat on the commission and were once again considered a major force. Bonanno himself became known as the Last Don, the only New York boss not in prison. The family's criminal machine was humming again, but this success just made them a bigger target. The fatal blow came from within. For all his precautions, Bonanno couldn't stop the one thing that truly terrified him: betrayal. In 2002, the family's nearly 70-year streak of having no made members cooperate with the government came to a crashing end. A captain named Frank Copa, facing a long prison sentence, decided to flip. He was soon followed by Richard Cantarella, the family's acting underboss. The dam of omerta had broken. One by one, high-ranking members began to turn. The information they provided was a goldmine for prosecutors. Armed with their testimony, the government unleashed the full force of RICO's financial penalties. The strategy was simple: choke off the money. Prosecutors systematically targeted the family's assets. In a major 2017 case, an acting capo named Ronald Gialonzo was convicted of running a massive loan sharking operation that had earned over $26 million over the years. The government didn't just send him to prison. They forced him to forfeit a $1 million mansion in Queens that was built with illicit cash and pay millions more in restitution. This was the new model. Take the man and take his money. The family's legitimate businesses, once perfect for laundering cash, were now liabilities. Federal investigations exposed car dealerships, construction companies, and other fronts controlled by the mob, seizing their assets and cutting off vital streams of income. Their traditional rackets were also dismantled. In the 2020s, indictments revealed ongoing schemes where the Bonanno and Genovese families jointly ran illegal gambling parlors out of cafes and soccer clubs. The operations were busted, and even a corrupt police detective was caught taking money to raid rival gambling spots. The financial bleeding was relentless. With their key earners in prison and their businesses seized, the family's ability to generate cash withered away. The empire that Joe Bonanno had built was being auctioned off piece by the federal government. The final devastating blow came in 2003 when the last Don, himself, Joseph Bonanno, was arrested in a sweeping RICO indictment for multiple murders, arson, and extortion. He was convicted in July 2004. Facing a second trial for another murder that could have resulted in the death penalty, Bonanno did what no New York boss had ever done. He agreed to cooperate with the government. The last Don became the ultimate informant. His decision was the death knell for the family's fortune and its reputation. He gave the government everything. The jury in his own trial had already approved a $10 million forfeiture of his criminal proceeds, and his cooperation ensured that the rest of the family's assets were now firmly in the government's sights. The man who had vowed to protect the family at all costs had now become the chief architect of its destruction. The Bonanno family, once a titan, was now broken, and exposed. The testimony of Joseph Bonanno was the cataclysm from which the Bonanno crime family would never recover. His cooperation triggered a final, devastating wave of convictions that gutted what was left of the family's leadership. In the 4 years leading up to Bonanno's conviction in July 2004, prosecutors had already convicted 75 mobsters and associates connected to the family. The last vestiges of their financial empire were seized, and the once feared organization was left in tatters. The immediate aftermath was pure chaos. With Bonanno in witness protection, a power vacuum opened up. Vincent "Vinny Gorgeous" Basciano took over as acting boss but was quickly convicted of racketeering and murder, thanks in no small part to Bonanno testifying against him in court. Basciano's successor, Salvatore Montagna, was deported to Canada. The leadership became a revolving door of acting bosses who were either imprisoned or compromised, leaving the family powerless. So what's left of the Bonanno crime family fortune today? The answer is not much. The business empire is gone. The construction, garment, and food industry fronts have been dismantled. The vast real estate holdings, like the Queen's Mansion bought with loan sharking money, have been forfeited. The torrent of cash from massive drug rings and extortion schemes has been reduced to a trickle. Today, the Bonanno family is often considered the most dysfunctional of New York's 5 families. While they still exist, their activities are a pale shadow of what they once were. Their rackets are now mostly low-level crimes: small-scale gambling, loan sharking, and fraud. Recent indictments from 2022 show they're still running illegal gambling parlors out of unassuming coffee bars and social clubs, often partnering with other families to pool their diminished resources. But these aren't the multi-million-dollar enterprises of the past. The family's membership is estimated to be around 130 made men, but many are old or in prison. They lack powerful leadership. The current alleged boss, Michael "The Nose" Mancuso, has spent much of his reign in prison trying to run things from behind bars. Among crime reporters and law enforcement, the consensus is that while a few individuals might still be wealthy, the family as a whole lacks the big, consistent moneymakers that once defined it. The days of controlling entire industries are over. The story of the Bonanno family's financial collapse offers a powerful lesson. For decades, law enforcement fought the mafia by targeting individual mobsters, a strategy that proved mostly useless. The organization was always bigger than the man. The fall of the Bonannos proved the effectiveness of a new kind of warfare, one that treated the mafia as what it truly was: a criminal corporation. It was the strategic focus on financial warfare that ultimately brought the empire to its knees. The RICO Act, with its asset forfeiture provisions, gave the government the tool it needed to attack the organization's lifeblood, its money. By seizing their businesses and confiscating their properties, the government didn't just punish the criminals, it dismantled the entire criminal machine. They made crime unprofitable. This external pressure created an internal crisis. Faced with the choice of life in prison with no money, or cooperating for a chance at leniency, proud, hardened mobsters began to do the unthinkable. The code of silence, omerta, was broken not by fear of a bullet, but by financial and legal calculus. Informants like Frank Coppa, Richard Contarella, and finally Joseph Bonanno himself provided the final key, unlocking the family's deepest secrets and allowing the government to complete the demolition. The Bonanno family's journey from a powerhouse to a relic is a stark reminder that no empire is too big to fail. They weren't just defeated by the FBI, they were bankrupted. Their story is the definitive case study in how to destroy a modern criminal enterprise. Don't just chase the men, chase the money. Because when the money is gone, the power, the loyalty, and the empire itself will inevitably fall apart. The secret world of organized crime is filled with stories of immense power and dramatic collapse. If you want more deep dives into the rise and fall of the criminal underworld, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode. And let us know in the comments, which crime family's story should we tell next? From the docks of Brooklyn to the boardrooms of the Commission, the Bonanno family carved out a financial empire built on fear, loyalty, and an unyielding pursuit of profit. They were masters of a hidden economy, a corporation of crime that for decades seemed untouchable. But in the end, the very foundation of their power, their immense wealth, became their greatest vulnerability. Attacked from the outside by relentless federal prosecutors and betrayed from within by those who put self-preservation above loyalty, their fortune crumbled, and with it, their legacy. The collapse of the Bonanno crime family fortune marked the end of an era, proving that in the modern age, the most powerful weapon against the mob wasn't a bullet, but a balance sheet.